Jesus bloody Christ! How does Lexi sleep through this night after night? Yes! Oh God, yes! Love me, Randy! Love me! Of course, he'd have to have a name like Randy. What would a Saturday night at Lexi's be without listening to her neighbor, Tiffany, squeal her joy at being pounded into the mattress by some guy named Butch, Hunter, or Tanner? Where does she find these guys? Why do none of them ever have normal names like Mike, John, or Tom? As I lay there pondering, if you can call it pondering with all the racket next door, but hey, give me points for trying to keep it PG, I realized that Friday nights weren't any different. In fact, it didn't matter what night of the week I stayed over. She was always howling. According to Lexi, Sundays were the quietest. Like the good Lord, Sundays, it seemed, were Tiffany's day of rest. Even insatiable nymphos needed a day to recharge their batteries. Just my luck, that Sunday was the one night I rarely slept over, because I had a class first thing on Monday morning. I groaned, and not in a good way. Tiffany might be a hot babe, but even if I wasn't in love with Lexi, I still wouldn't want to bed the nympho. Secretly, I called Tiffany Squeaky. During her escapades, she made sounds that reminded me of a baby's squeak toy. She'd start out slow and random, but the more aroused she got, the louder and more frequent they became. By the end, it was one long squeak, with only the pitch varying. Even Crumpet, Lexi's cat, hated Squeaky. She'd meow like crazy every time Tiffany's performance began. I couldn't blame her. Then again, maybe I had it wrong. Maybe Crumpet loved Tiffany and thought of her as some long-lost relative. I turned my head to glance at Lexi. Unbelievable. She was dead to the world. Again, the question crossed my mind. How the hell does she sleep through this night after night? My little head urged me to wake her, but my big head knew that would be about as successful as asking a snowflake not to melt in the midday sun. Lexi was sweet and funny most of the time, but not in the mornings, and especially not if woken from a deep slumber. So, no relief from the fiancé. What were my other options? Bury my face under a pillow? Earplugs? Or dare I try to avoid blue balls and spank the monkey? If Lexi could sleep through Tiffany's yodeling and Crumpet's meowing, could she sleep through me engaging in a bit of wrist action? Tiffany squealing like a stuck pig made my decision for me. Randy was clearly on the homeward stretch. I could hear the slap of skin on skin and decided to slap a bit of skin myself. Grabbing a handful of tissues, proud of myself for thinking ahead, I slipped my hand into my boxers and took matters into my own hands. It didn't take long to get up to speed, if you catch my drift. Panting as quietly as I could, I quickened the pace of my five-fingered tango, aiming to time my climax with theirs. Yes, yes, yes! Oh, Randy! Tiffany squeaked. Christ, she's noisy. What's the bet she's faking it? As usual, she was taking Randy along for the ride. The guy did a good imitation of someone in their death throes. I smirked. Yep, little death, you are such sweet, sweet agony. I wasn't far behind him. After a quick check to confirm Lexi was still out for the count, I grabbed the wad of tissues and cleaned off my torso. Sated, I rolled onto my side, spooned my girl, and drifted off to sleep. I slipped out of bed and paused, defying my bladder that was insisting it was the size of a small country and needed emptying. Ignoring it, I stared at my sleeping girlfriend. As usual, she looked like an innocent angel, her blonde hair a cloud around her head. You'd never guess by looking at her how mischievous and sassy she was. Those were qualities I loved about her, right along with her generosity and sense of humor. It was no wonder she was one of the top salespeople for the menswear chain she worked for. Apart from being pretty with a great figure, she could charm the birds from the trees. That's how we met. I went into her store and she sold me a shirt. She absolutely bowled me over. The next week I was back and she sold me some trousers. The next week another shirt. And so it went until I finally plucked up the courage to ask her out. The running joke between us was that she only said yes because she was running out of things to sell me. She says she loves the way my smile lights up my face, whatever that means. I genuinely have no idea what she means by that. All I know is I cringe every time she says it because for the rest of the day, All I'd hear on a bloody loop in my head is that old toothpaste ad. Asterisk. Show us your smile. White is in style. Are your McLean showing? It's not a sin. It's how you grin. That's your McLean showing. Why couldn't she say she loved my baby blues or messy black hair? Or maybe my intelligence and personality. Better yet, my six-pack abs or sparkling wit. I mightn't be as sexy as that guy on asterisk Game of Thrones asterisk that she was so enamored with. But, hey, I wasn't chopped liver either. But, no, it was always the damn smile. With a final glance at my sweet Lexi, a parody of my infamous smile on my face, I succumbed to the demands of my bladder and headed for the bathroom. After taking care of business, showering, and shaving, I returned to the bedroom to find Lexi still fast asleep. I sighed. If I had any sense, I'd be jealous of her bed. She sure seemed to have a love affair with it, and sleeping. Her bottom lip looked soft and full from sleep, and I wanted to suck it into my mouth and really kiss her. But I pushed my lustful thoughts down and instead placed a light kiss on her forehead before grabbing my gear, intending to dress in the lounge so as not to wake her. Once dressed, I checked the fridge and pantry, not surprised to find very little on offer. Keeping house and cooking weren't Lexi's strong points, something my mother regularly pointed out to me. Mum was horrified that I did most of the shopping and cooking when I stayed at Lexi's, despite the menswear boutique she worked at being in a shopping center with 2 supermarkets, along with a specialist greengrocer, butcher, and delicatessen. When Mum would start on Lexi's lack of homemaking skills, I'd just shrug and either remind her how caring Lexi was of her grandmother or tell her she should thank the gods I'd listened when she attempted to teach me cooking and other life skills. I made myself some toast and logged into the Uber app on my phone to start my self-designated shift. Before I'd even made it to the front door, my last slice of toast hanging from the corner of my mouth, I had a ride request, airport to a hotel in the CBD. With a quick press of a finger, I accepted the job and headed out to my pride and joy, a fully restored 1967 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud 3. With her black Duco, silver bonnet, plush red leather, and wood trim interior, she was too nice a car for ferrying people all over the city, but her uniqueness had earned me many repeat customers who appreciated elegance, fine craftsmanship, and mechanics. The day passed quickly, helped by a lot of fares and little downtime. Of course, that meant I hadn't gotten much study done in between fares, but I could make that up while Lexi was away visiting her sick gran in Melbourne. Besides, as usual, I needed the money from my part-time Uber driving to pay my half of next semester's course fees. I pulled into my parents' driveway, tired and hungry after working 12 hours straight. God, I hoped my mother had cooked one of her famous pot roasts. She, unlike Lexi, had excellent homemaker skills. Luck was on my side. Not only was pot roast on the menu, but also her mouth-watering potato bake. And, if my nose wasn't deceiving me, an apple pie was in the oven. Fan-fucking-tastic. All I had time for was a quick cleanup before taking my place at the dinner table. "How was your day, Jamie?" "Good, Dad. Lots of rides, and long ones. So good for the dollars and light on the fuel consumption." My father nodded approvingly. He was a man big on a person paying their own way through life. With my car, as with my uni course fees, he'd said he'd match me dollar for dollar, but he wouldn't just go out and buy me a car as soon as I was old enough to hold a license. He maintained that things received too easily weren't appreciated or looked after, and that a little blood, sweat, and tears, along with some sacrifice, was the best way to teach a person to appreciate what they had. When I'd saved half the cost of a dilapidated Rolls-Royce, Mum had thought I was crazy, but Dad was a man of his word and hadn't balked at coughing up his half. He'd even spent many a Saturday helping me source parts and restore her to her former glory. Now, she was worth almost 10 times what we'd spent on her. Lexi teased me, calling my car my mistress, but she was pleased she was going to be ferried to the church in such a classy ride. Dinner conversation went along the usual route, and once I was done eating, I excused myself to call Lexi. I never liked to let a day go by without hearing her sweet voice. "Hey, babe, how was your day?" "Good, lots of fares. What did you get up to?" "Not much. Had a nice sleep in and then pottered around. Watched a movie. What was the movie? Lexi named some chick flick, and I zoned out as she gushed about how romantic it was. Are you sure you don't want me to take you to the airport in the morning? I have enough time before my lecture. No, I'll be fine, Jamie. Actually, I should stop gabbing and go pack. I frowned. She'd had all day to pack, and she waited until the only time I had free to get around to it. I opened my mouth to comment, but closed it again. No point in ending our last conversation before she left to see her gran in an argument. We'd had enough of them in recent times as it was. Okay, bye, babe. See you at the end of the week. Love you. I opened my mouth again, this time to tell her I loved her, but before the words could pass my lips, she'd hung up. I shrugged, trying to shake off my annoyance, reminding myself she was probably stressed about all the last-minute things she needed to get done before our wedding. The sound of an incoming message woke me as the first rays of dawn slipped through the gap in my curtains. I rubbed my eyes and cursed myself for forgetting to mute the volume on my smartphone before calling it quits the night before. Thinking it could be Lexi changing her mind about a lift to the airport, I grabbed my phone from the bedside drawer. No message from Lexi, just a generic one from Uber asking for available drivers, as they were low on drivers and high on demand. After a quick glance at the time, I replied to Uber, confirming my availability for approximately 3 hours. Their thank you message arrived immediately, coinciding with another chime, my first ride, a run from the city center to the international terminal. In under 10 minutes, I managed to take a leak, throw on some clothes, pack my unibag, brush my teeth, and grab my car keys. I stopped in the kitchen long enough to leave my parents a note, grab a handful of muesli bars, and fill a bottle with water. As I navigated the almost deserted suburban streets that led to the highway into the city, I mused about my time as an Uber driver. I quite enjoyed it, and had come to know the city like the back of my hand. On top of that, I'd met a lot of interesting people, some of whom could well prove useful once I completed my engineering degree. One guy had even had me drive around the block a few times while he explained a concept that ended up helping me get a high distinction on my essay for that subject. He wouldn't let me discount the fare, and even left me a generous tip along with his business card. With the streets reasonably quiet due to the early hour, I made good time to the hotel. Parking in their pickup zone, I quickly texted the client via the Uber link to let him know I was ready and waiting. 10 minutes passed with no sign of my fare, but just as I was about to send off a second text, a stressed and anxious-looking guy exited the hotel. He scanned the pickup zone, clearly searching for someone or something. I clambered onto the sidewalk. Stephen Cummings? A relieved smile broke across his face. That's me. Sorry I've kept you waiting. Checkout took longer than I expected. Cool. No worries. Let me give you a hand with that, I said, taking the handle of his roll-on suitcase and heading for the rear of my car. I didn't like it when people threw their cases on the back seat, as their wheels often left scuff marks on the upholstery. The easiest way to avoid the issue was to take their cases from them and place them in the trunk myself. Sweet ride, mate. She's a real beauty, Stephen commented, letting himself in the back on the passenger side and immediately reaching for the seatbelt. His audible sigh coincided with the click of the seatbelt. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I turned the key and the engine purred to life. He had his glasses clasped in one hand and his head resting back, eyes closed. Tough day to look forward to? I asked. The worst. We lost a big project we thought we had in the bag to a competitor, and now I get to go back and tell that to the board. I'm just hoping they don't shoot the messenger. It doesn't help that it was my design, too. Well, that sucks. Sure does. Probably means I can kiss an end-of-year bonus goodbye, which in turn means no going on the cruise my wife has her heart set on. Don't give up yet, man. Miracles do happen. Even to my own ears, the platitude sounded empty and lame. Stephen fell silent, and to all appearances he seemed to be dozing. I concentrated on navigating my way through the increasingly busy traffic. Stephen, we're just about at the drop-off zone. At my quietly spoken words, Stephen roused and looked about. Wow, that was quick. I pulled in behind a taxi, took my car out of gear, and pulled on the handbrake. I met Stephen at the rear of my car. Man, I don't mean to overstep, but I've been thinking about your problem. If it was me, I'd try one last pitch. I'd call their head honcho and confirm if he and his team have truly compared what you and the other guy have to offer, reiterate all the areas where you outshine your competition, and address any concerns where they might have the edge. Maybe offer to adjust your design. Is there flexibility there? Sometimes a small tweak can make all the difference. You've already been told no. So what do you have to lose by giving it one last shot? Stephen looked at me long and hard. You're not like any taxi driver I've ever come across before. I grinned. That's because I'm Uber. A matching grin spread across Stephen's face. Well, you certainly have given me some great advice. Advice I'm going to take. I nodded, still smiling. It ain't over till the fat lady sings, right? Right. I watched Stephen walk into the terminal, noticing a spring in his step and his shoulders more squared. Turning my attention to my phone, I browsed Uber for my next ride, hoping for something nearby that would take me back towards downtown or the university campus. Just as a frown creased my brow, a new job popped up on the list. Yes, a fare from the domestic terminal to Randwick. I smiled. It was near the University of New South Wales campus. It couldn't be more perfect. Without hesitation, I confirmed the job. The drive between terminals was short, and I found a guy waiting at the designated pickup point. I wound down my window. Richard Stroker? The one and only. Leaving the car idling, I climbed out, and as with my previous client, took his suitcase from him and headed toward the rear of my car. Looks like you're planning to stay for a while, I observed, nodding at the size of his luggage as I heaved it into the trunk. Yeah, I'm here for a week-long love fest with a bird I met and hooked up with about a month ago at a sales convention. I'll probably spend the week naked. He chuckled. So maybe I've overpacked. I did a double take at his bluntness. Good for you, I replied dryly. A sidelong glance at his face told me my sarcasm had gone over his head, which was just as well. No need to lose a good fare just because I thought the guy was a jerk. Who was I to judge anyway? Perhaps the woman in question was no more looking for commitment than he was. Mind if I join you in the front? I hate sitting in the back. Suit yourself. My voice was neutral, but inwardly I groaned. Hopefully, the guy wasn't a chatterbox. No such luck. This is a cool car, dude. Can't believe I'm riding to a hookup in a Rolls. Thanks, was all I could think of to reply. So, yeah, I met this chick. Sorry to interrupt, Richard. Call me Rich. Ah, okay. Rich, what street in Randwick? Let me check. I waited while he pulled his phone from his shirt pocket. Carrington Road. I hesitated for a moment. Great. Know it well. So, yeah, as I was saying, I met this chick last month at a sales seminar the company we both work for held in Melbourne. Being new to the company, it was my first seminar, but she's worked for them for a few years and has been to several. The guy I replaced introduced me to her, said he'd had a good time with her at the last one. I had intended to tune him out and only give non-committal noises to his ramblings, but his words jolted me. Last month, Lexi had attended a convention held by the retail chain she worked for. That, too, had been in Melbourne. Surely a coincidence. Yes, it must be a coincidence. Melbourne probably hosted 100 or more conventions and events every week. She acted all sweet and innocent, but sure as hell didn't dress that way. She looked as sexy as hell, and once I got her back to my room, man, was she hot to trot. At that moment, his monologue was interrupted by an incoming text on his phone. Melbourne must be the place to go, I decided. Seemed like everyone but me went regularly. Lexi certainly did. Every long weekend she headed down to visit her gran. Excuse me, he said, a smirk pulling at his lips as he read the message. Like I said, she was absolutely gagging for it, just like she is now. Wants to know if my flight arrived on time. Says she's waiting for me in her prettiest pink nightie. He laughed. She won't have that on for long if I have my say. I struggled to suppress my distaste at his cockiness. The guy clearly thought he was God's gift to women. In fact, if I have my way, she'll be naked for the entire week. I forced a laugh and a nod, using the need to change lanes as an excuse not to speak. She's gotten rid of her boyfriend for the week, and I intend to take full advantage of his absence. She'll be walking bow-legged by the time I'm finished with her. Doesn't it bother you that she's already in a relationship? That she's cheating on her boyfriend with you? Richard Stroker, as I'd silently dubbed him, merely shrugged. Not up to me to be the morality police. With easy girls like her, if she wasn't cheating with me, she'd be cheating with somebody else. Hell, according to the other guys, she's done half the company, so why should I deny myself such a hot piece of ass? The bird is a bit of a nympho, if you ask me. She couldn't get enough the last time we hooked up. Besides, despite telling me our night had to be a one-time thing, she's been texting and emailing me for a month, wanting a repeat. Lucky you, I coughed, choking on my own breath. Richard laughed. Have I shocked you, man? I nodded, putting on my indicator. He sure as hell didn't sugarcoat it. His crassness went beyond locker room talk and mildly repulsed me. Richard laughed again. Hey, it's just guy talk, right? Sure, whatever you reckon. Richard nodded. I'm even hoping she'll invite her neighbor in for a threesome. She's apparently a bit of a nympho, too. The blonde on her own would be worth using up a week's worth of my annual leave, but a threesome with two hotties, well, a sick seed of fear bloomed in the pit of my stomach. I struggled against its insidious urge to spread, to overwhelm me. Almost 3 years of loving and trusting Lexi battled against a mounting series of coincidences. Surely not. Surely she wouldn't. Not my sweet Lexi. What had I done or said to deserve this? Why would she betray me? Weren't we happy? We were set to marry as soon as I completed my degree in November, just 3 short months away. The loyal fiancé in me refused to believe she was capable of such betrayal. Yet, the pragmatic, analytical side of my nature, nurtured by my engineering studies, scrutinized the past month since her return from the conference. A month marked by oscillating affection, moments of effusive love followed by distant, irritable spells. And her newfound assertiveness in bed during this time. There was a pattern emerging. Each trip to Melbourne seemed to trigger a change in Lexi's demeanor. Sometimes the shifts lasted only briefly. This time, it had persisted for a month, and counting. Previously, I attributed it to concern for her grandmother, whom she dearly loved, and then my inner struggle ceased. With a few callous words, Richard ended my internal battle. Her nickname among the guys is Flexi Lexi, 'cause man, that girl is flexible. Almost tied herself into a pretzel the last time we hooked up. The words crashed over me like a speeding train thundering past a platform. An invisible vice gripped my chest, making each breath a struggle. Years later, I would ponder how I managed to keep my hands steady on the wheel and prevent causing an accident. We're almost there, Rich. What street number? My voice sounded distant to my own ears, but a quick glance at Richard showed him behaving normally, checking his phone again. Number 28, Unit 7. If any lingering doubts about Lexi's betrayal had still clung to me, Dick had obliterated them. Confusion and anguish surged through me like a tidal wave. Why? Why would she do this to me? To us? I had been loving, attentive, supportive. Sure, I had my quirks that annoyed Lexi, but nothing that justified this betrayal. I was on the verge of completing my degree, poised for a promising career with opportunities that could fulfill Lexi's dreams of a future abroad, where she could eventually focus on our family without financial worries. Part of me wanted to turn the car around and flee in the opposite direction, yet I was compelled to confront Lexi's betrayal head-on, like a fish caught on a line, reeled in inexorably. I struggled to comprehend this compulsion. Was it masochism? Self-destructiveness? Perhaps it was a desperate need to eradicate any lingering doubts that had already been crushed. Maybe it was self-preservation, driven by the certainty that once seen, there would be no turning back, no room for her to deceive me with lies or half-truths, no chance for me to succumb to her pleas. which I suspected would be plentiful. "Cool. I'll have you there in about 5 minutes," I managed to say, marveling at my own ability to speak amidst the turmoil churning in my gut. Dick didn't reply, absorbed in his texting. I stole a glance and saw enough to make my stomach churn. Parking at the curb, I cut the engine and stepped out. My legs felt unsteady as I retrieved Dick's suitcase from the trunk. "Here," I said, forcing the words out. "Let me help you with this. You've piqued my interest about this nympho blonde. Mind if I take a peek at her in her pink nightie to entertain me through the rest of my shift?" Dick, the arrogant prick, laughed. "Sure thing, mate. Have a good look." "Thanks," I managed, attempting a smile that likely failed to convince. "Lead the way." Dick swaggered confidently up the path to the apartment block entrance, his demeanor matching his attitude. I followed with his suitcase, shooting daggers with my eyes that could have incinerated him on the spot. But deep down, I knew he was probably right. If not him, it would likely be someone else. Lexi's apartment was on the second floor. It took all my self-control to wait while Dick figured out the ancient elevators. With each passing moment, anguish transformed into a cold, seething rage. Not the fiery kind that consumes and destroys, but a chilling, numbing rage that spread through me like Arctic ice. Each beat in my head felt like another shard of ice fracturing and coursing through my veins. I welcomed the coldness that enveloped me. It kept the confusion and anguish at bay, reserving them for later when I could be alone with my thoughts. The icy water of hatred coursing through my veins was a relief, a stark contrast to the crippling emotions of pain and betrayal. The elevator groaned and creaked, and Dick muttered irritably under his breath. I stood in silence, waiting. Finally, the door slid open with a reluctant wheeze. Dick sighed impatiently. This thing should be in a museum. Another reason not to leave her apartment all week. Suppressing the urge to correct him, I waited as Dick hesitated, unsure of the way. Eventually, we headed down the corridor in the right direction. Standing at Lexi's door, I almost chuckled. Dick smoothed his hair, adjusted his clothes, and then inconspicuously adjusted himself. I half expected him to check his breath. He knocked on Lexi's door 3 times. Almost immediately, her voice came from inside. "Coming!" Even through the door, her breathless excitement was unmistakable. The wait felt longer than it actually was. When the door swung open, Lexi stood before us in a pink, gauzy, baby doll negligee, posing as if on a magazine cover. I stifled a laugh. To Dick, she likely appeared alluring with her ample display of cleavage and legs, but to me, she looked absurd and contrived. "Hey, lover," Lexi cooed, her eyes fixed on Dick. I moved slightly to ensure I was in her line of sight. "I've been waiting—" Lexi's gasp cut her sentence short. Dick glanced down at himself, seemingly checking for any mishaps from the flight. "You've been waiting," I prompted, my voice steady. Lexi remained frozen, staring at me with wide-eyed horror. "What?" Dick turned to look between Lexi and me, confusion creasing his brow. "Let me assist you, Lexi," I continued, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "You've been eagerly awaiting Mr. Dick Stroker here to come and spend a week with you, ravishing you senseless. Am I right, or am I right? His name seems quite fitting. A poetic coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Lexi's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as she struggled to find words. Dick's expression shifted from confusion to realization, his gaze darting between us as he processed the scene unfolding before him. Dick looked bewilderedly between Lexi and me. "Dude, what's going on?" Lexi's hand rose to cover her mouth, her other reaching out towards me as if to explain. "Why, thank you, Lexi," I said, my voice steady. "Yes, I would like the engagement ring I gave you in love and trust returned, seeing as neither applies any longer." I took her extended hand, sliding the ring off her finger and into my jeans pocket. I mimicked the smile she once cherished before stepping back. "I've delayed things enough. I'll leave now and let you 2 lovebirds get on with your planned love fest. Enjoy yourselves. Flexi, Lexi, and Dick Stroker." Turning on my heel, I walked away. Behind me, I heard Dick asking Lexi who I was and what was happening. Her response was a jumble of incomprehensible words. Good. Let her cry. I hoped tears poured down her face, a mere fraction of the pain she had caused me. I hoped regret consumed her, gnawing at her heart like acid. I hoped guilt twisted her insides. Reaching my car, I marveled at my calm demeanor. Everything felt surreal. One day, I was part of a loving couple preparing for a wedding in just a few months. The next, I was single. One day, I believed I was loved and respected. Now, I was faced with contempt, for her actions spoke volumes. How and why Lexi's feelings had changed were questions I couldn't answer, and after her ongoing betrayal, I didn't care to ask. How could I trust anything she said now, when lies seemed to be her new truth? I maneuvered through the familiar streets, navigating without much thought. My mind was elsewhere, consumed by the recent events with Lexi. Her voice calling my name echoed in my ears, haunting me even as I drove away. Through the rearview mirror, I glimpsed her barefoot figure in that ridiculous nightie, tears streaking down her face. A grim smile tugged at my lips. Seeing her distraught gave me a perverse satisfaction. She deserved to feel some of the pain she had inflicted on me. Weeks passed with Lexi following what I termed the cheater's playbook. She bombarded me with calls, texts, and emails. She even tried involving my family, pleading with them to mediate. Her messages were filled with apologies, excuses, and regrets. Everything except genuine remorse. I ignored every attempt. The fact that her parents hadn't reached out directly to me or my family spoke volumes. They must have suspected the reason behind our sudden breakup. My mother, usually a pillar of support, seemed devastated. Despite Lexi's shortcomings, Mom had embraced her as part of the family. She'd always seen my girlfriends as daughters she never had. Lexi was no exception. To her credit, Mom never pressured me to reconcile with Lexi. She only suggested that I might need closure at some point. For me, retrieving the engagement ring had been closure enough. Actions, not words, defined the end of my relationship with Lexi. Thoughts of vengeance simmered within me. I didn't wish harm upon her. No, that would be too simple. What I craved was for Lexi to endure a long life filled with remorse and regret. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to rue the day she betrayed our love and threw it all away. Loneliness and sadness were what I wished upon her, a bitter existence where she pined for what she had callously discarded. In my daydreams, I envisioned her repeatedly devastated by her partner's infidelities, the shock and anguish on her face when she discovered them in compromising situations. Strangely, it was never my image I saw in those scenarios, but hers. When I woke from these fantasies of her suffering and remorse, where she yearned for the innocence and happiness of our past, I felt no guilt. Karma, I mused. Karma will eventually catch up with her. Despite my skepticism towards closure, a concept my mother insisted upon with persistent zeal, I agreed to meet Lexi for coffee. Personally, I dismissed it as psychobabble nonsense. But I chose a small cafe for our meeting, stirring sugar into my coffee as I waited. Just as I lifted the cup to take the first sip, Lexi entered, shattering the moment with her presence. She paused at the door, scanning the room, typical of her to disrupt even that fleeting moment of tranquility. Once her eyes found mine, Lexi flashed one of her trademark smiles. I scanned her face for any hint of nervousness, but found none. Was she truly that confident? Perhaps she believed a charming smile and what she deemed a seductive outfit would be enough to reel me back in. Each piece of clothing seemed strategically chosen to accentuate her physical attributes. Little did she know, those attributes no longer held any sway over me. It amazed me how little attraction I felt toward her now. Her actions had obliterated 3 years of love and desire in less than a day, and nearly 2 months later, my feelings had only hardened. Where I once saw sweetness and beauty, I now saw vanity and selfishness. Her once charming traits of generosity and humor now seemed tainted by deceit and betrayal. It was like biting into what appeared to be a ripe, juicy apple, only to find it rotten and infested with worms. Suddenly, my appetite for Lexi had vanished. If she had carried herself with grace, I would have risen like a gentleman to pull out her chair. Instead, staying seated allowed me to evade her attempt at a hug, which involved brushing her chest against my arm, an obvious ploy to seduce me. I suppressed a sigh. I had never considered her unintelligent before, but clearly she lacked tactical finesse. Interesting time in bed was what had landed her in this mess, and certainly not a strategy to win me back. She would have been wiser to appeal to my intellect and demonstrate genuine remorse. "Oh, Jamie, thank you for agreeing to meet me. I've missed you so much." "There's so much I need to say," Lexi gushed. I struggled to suppress a cringe. For a fleeting moment, I entertained breaking my promise to my mother about hearing Lexi out. Mum insisted that someday I'd appreciate having clarity and closure, assuming Lexi was truthful, which I doubted. "I'm listening," I said tersely, "but I don't have much time, so please say what you need to say so we can both move on." Her hurt expression briefly satisfied me, a feeling I wasn't proud of but couldn't deny. I wanted her out of my life, relegated to my rearview mirror. "Don't talk about moving on, Jamie," she pleaded. "Please forgive me. We belong together." "I've always known that. From our first date." "Really?" I interrupted, but Lexi pressed on without pause. "It's just... I panicked. Our wedding was 3 months away, and I felt like I hadn't experienced life enough. Tiffany convinced me to sow my wild oats now, while I'm young, before settling down with a family. I never meant for you to find out, and I thought what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you. You have to believe me, Jamie. I love you. I want to spend my life with you." It struck me that Lexi was insinuating her week-long escapade with Dick Stroker was her maiden voyage into infidelity. That infuriated me. Even now she couldn't muster honesty. "Really? You have a peculiar way of showing your love. Since when does inviting a third party into a relationship constitute a great romance? Do you think if Romeo had found Juliet in bed with Mercutio, he'd have been understanding if she said, 'I'm young, I need to sow some wild oats. I'll just spend some interesting time in bed with him when you're out of town. Don't worry, I'll be discreet.' Is that metaphor too highbrow for you? So please, spare me the bullshit about loving me and our destined future together." And so it continued, with Lexi spouting all the familiar excuses and justifications, each one I dissected in my mind, countering her arguments, but she remained steadfast in her script, disregarding anything that didn't support her case. If she had been less focused on defending herself, she might have noticed my lack of emotional response. "You cheated on me, Lexi. No matter how you try to rationalize it, the fact remains. You cheated. You went behind my back and had a fling with another man. Cheated? That term doesn't do justice to what you did. It trivializes your actions, like equating it to peeking at answers during Trivial Pursuit, which, by the way, I know you do. Ironically, I used to find it endearing. Silly me for not recognizing it as the character flaw it was. Cheated? Damn. The more I say it, the more I despise that word." "Who came up with that term for what you did?" "Probably another cheater. Someone who was too afraid to call a spade a spade. Someone who thought using more accurate words like liar, traitor, and backstabber were too harsh." "What? I didn't murder anyone." "Not someone. Something. I've sat here and listened to all your bullshit excuses and rationalizations. If I were to believe you, what you did was no worse than sneaking an extra chocolate for yourself. As long as I didn't know, I wouldn't be hurt or offended or feel like I missed out. But what you've done is so much worse than cheating. You murdered us. You killed our future, our plans, our dreams, our life together. You lied to the person you've spent years professing your love to. You stabbed me in the back. You betrayed the team that was us. Remember you and me against the world. You betrayed that. And by that betrayal, you murdered us. So, yes, You are a murderer." I leaned back and watched the impact of my words sink in. I meant every single one of them, and then some. I could have said more. I could have confronted her about her lies of omission, if Dick Stroker was to be believed, and he had no reason to lie. She'd been sowing her wild oats for much longer than just a few months. But it didn't matter to me anymore. Whether once or 100 times, betrayal was betrayal. A lie was a lie. She had killed us the first time she chose to deceive me with another man. Watching Lexi's face was like witnessing a B-grade horror movie, the kind where someone undergoes a grotesque transformation into a zombie or a werewolf. Each emotion flickered across her face. Shock turned to fear, pain to guilt, shame to remorse, and desperation to despair. When she reached devastation, it was as if her face collapsed in on itself. She lingered there briefly before her psyche pulled her back from the brink, and I observed the tide of emotions reversing. I knew it would be too much for her to fully comprehend and accept. That much I had anticipated, but I would always carry the memory of her brief realization of the true extent of the damage she had wrought. "No," she whispered, her face contorting with sorrowful disbelief. "No." I remained silent, relishing her discomfort. My anger burned fiercely because the pain she'd inflicted ran deep. You don't develop such intense rage without first experiencing profound hurt. Unfortunately for Lexi, my anger had completely eclipsed the love I once felt for her. "No," she pleaded again, her voice quivering. "You have to forgive me. Give us another chance." "No, I don't. Please, Jamie, please don't give up on us. I swear I'll never do it again." I didn't bother with the usual arguments about trust and betrayal. There was no point. My satisfaction from watching her facade crumble had peaked, and now I wanted to leave. Her quick recovery to pleading was expected, but I had already planted the seed of truth. I had seen it take hold. Now all I could do was hope that her subconscious would torment her with the reality of her actions for the rest of her life. "I don't know, Lexi. You hurt me bad. Let me think about it. Call me in a week or two. Maybe, with time, we could be friends," I said reluctantly. She gave me 4 days. I sighed inwardly and agreed to meet for another coffee. Why? Perhaps it was my wounded pride, or maybe a lingering hope for closure. Seeing her squirm and plead was a bitter satisfaction. This time, she arrived first and even bought me a coffee. She was dressed to impress, but her efforts fell flat. I forced a half-hearted smile and silently endured as she nervously rambled about her week, all the while subtly flaunting herself. When she asked about me, my responses were curt. I kept one hand on my cup, the other firmly in my lap. Once, when I rested my hand on the table, she reached for it. I allowed her touch briefly, not wanting to make a scene, before retracting my hand and returning it to my lap, my expression unreadable. Despite the small ego boost her efforts to reconcile provided, being in Lexi's presence was far more challenging than I anticipated. What once seemed beautiful now appeared ugly, and it required real determination to remain seated. I managed 30 minutes. My last sip of coffee was nearly cold enough to qualify as an iced coffee. Glancing at my watch, I stood up. I have to go now. See you later, Lexi." "Wait," she said, rising as well. "There's a Humphrey Bogart retrospective at the Palace Verona Cinema next week. I know you enjoy those kinds of movies, so I thought maybe we could go together." "I'll think about it. Give me a call in a few days and I'll let you know." She was right. I did have a soft spot for old black and white films and classic cinema. My dad introduced me to them. He had an extensive collection. Bogey, Cary Grant, Gregory Peck, among others. It was almost embarrassing how often we'd watched films like The Maltese Falcon or North by Northwest together. "Okay, love you," she called after me as I walked away. I didn't turn or respond. Surprisingly, when she called a few days later, I said yes. I couldn't help but compare myself to a moth drawn to Lexi's flame of reconciliation. I despised her, yet I needed her pursuit to mend my wounds. At least in a movie theater, I wouldn't have to endure looking at her or listening to her thinly veiled attempts to win me back. Her choice of Wednesday night and her vague description of which Humphrey Bogart film we'd see piqued my curiosity, so I checked the Verona's website. I chuckled when I saw she had chosen Sabrina. The theater was showing a different bogey film each night of the retrospective. Any other night we could have watched classics like Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, The Cane Mutiny, High Sierra, or The Big Sleep, all decidedly not romantic comedies. I rolled my eyes as I closed my laptop. Did she really think watching Bogey fall for Audrey Hepburn's character would melt my heart and make me propose to her again? She tried to convince me to pick her up, but I brushed her off, insisting I'd meet her outside the cinema at 6:45. She wasn't pleased. Knowing the parking situation on, or even near, Oxford Street was a gamble. I decided to take the bus from campus. It meant leaving straight after classes and arriving a bit early, but I didn't mind. There was always something interesting to see along the bustling street. At exactly 6:45, I strolled down to the cinema. As expected, Lexi was already waiting there. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't like her to be so punctual. "Where did you park?" she asked, greeting me with a hug that I didn't reciprocate. She attempted to kiss me on the lips, but I turned my head, catching it on my cheek instead. "I didn't park. I took a bus straight from uni," I replied. "Oh," she said, sounding disappointed. "I was hoping you could give me a ride home after the movie. I caught a train straight from work." "Well, you know what they say, Lexi," I remarked, raising an eyebrow at her. She looked puzzled. "Never assume, as you only make an ass out of you and me." She attempted a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Shall we go in?" I asked, gesturing towards the cinema entrance. Lexi nodded eagerly, trying to take my hand, but I deftly avoided it by slipping my hands into my jeans pockets. Her disappointment was palpable when I stepped aside at the ticket counter, indicating she should pay for her own ticket. I felt no remorse or lack of chivalry about it. After all, she had invited me out, and if we were to split hairs, she was the one with a full-time job while I juggled part-time work and studies. Within 10 minutes of the movie starting, I regretted agreeing to come. The entire film became a delicate dance of evasion as I tried to avoid her attempts to hold my hand, dip into my popcorn, rest her hand on my knee, and plant kisses on my cheek. My attention was more on dodging her advances than on the screen, and I missed most of the plot. If Lexi was displeased at the beginning of the evening, her impatience was undeniable by the end, thinly veiled by frustration. Seeing her irritation was like applying a soothing layer of aloe on a burn. It was oddly satisfying and helped me heal. "Okay, thanks, and see you around," I said dismissively. "What? Aren't you even going to walk me to my bus stop?" Lexi's tone was expectant. "No, my next bus home is due shortly and leaves from a different stop to yours. If I miss it, I'll have a 40-minute wait for the next one. Besides, you're a big girl," I replied coolly. "We could go grab a bite to eat and catch later buses home," she suggested, her eyes hopeful. "No can do. I have some study to do. Bye," I said firmly, smiling inwardly at the disappointment on her face. It was another salve on my wounds. With that, I turned and walked away. I hadn't even managed to shove my laptop into my backpack when the opening chords of Bon Jovi's "You Give Love a Bad Name" blared from my jeans pocket. I groaned inwardly. The song was a classic, but it now served as my ringtone for Lexi, replacing the sappy love song she had set way back in the early days of our relationship. "An angel's smile is what you sell. You promised me heaven, then put me through hell." As the lyrics played, I debated whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. Voicemail won. I wasn't in the mood to subject myself to more of her pleading messages. I had exams to study for, essays to finish, and I wasn't about to let myself be distracted by a woman who couldn't keep her promises or her fidelity. One of the greatest benefits of studying to become an engineer was the honing of my ability to compartmentalize and tackle problems one at a time. Lexi's latest attempt at reconciliation could wait for another day. Relief flooded through my shoulders and neck for the first time in 2 weeks. It was finally over. My last exam was behind me. No more essays to write, no more revising notes for tests. While it would be a couple of weeks before I knew my results, I felt confident. I had put in the work, and I knew my stuff. Shouldering my backpack, I turned towards the pub where I had agreed to meet some fellow students to celebrate the end of our studies. The afternoon breeze was refreshing on my slightly sweaty face, a welcome relief after the stuffy exam hall filled with 250 young, nervous, and likely sleep-deprived bodies. Too much for the antiquated air conditioning system. The sounds of celebration reached my ears long before I reached the pub, with Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall lyrics drifting on the wind. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control, I chuckled to myself. They may sing about not needing it, but each of those students singing had paid a hefty price for their education. As my father often said, there's no such thing as a free education in Australia. Nevertheless, I found myself joining in before I even took 2 steps inside. As I approached the bar to order my first beer, a swift movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I turned my head to see who it was. She was a stranger, but undeniably attractive, so I let my gaze linger. She turned towards me with a smile. Better watch it. If you look any longer, you might have to buy me a drink. How about I buy you 3 then, because I could be a while. Quick on your feet, she chuckled. I like that. I'm Stella. I'm Jamie. What are you drinking? Pear cider. I placed our orders and we began chatting. Stella seemed vaguely familiar, and after comparing notes, we realized we had shared 1 or 2 lectures where our majors intersected. She was studying to be an architect, while I pursued civil engineering. She had 1 year left to go, poor thing. Stella invited me to join her and her friends, and with drinks in hand, we navigated through the lively crowd. Stella fit the image I had in mind for someone named Stella. Perhaps my addiction to watching The Fall, with the ever-sexy and enigmatic Gillian Anderson playing DSI Stella Gibson, colored my perception. Both were of average height, but that was where the similarities ended. Unlike the intense TV character, Stella laughed freely and frequently. She was intelligent, akin to her namesake, which only added to her charm. As I chuckled at another amusing story about one of Stella's quirky lecturers, a hand landed on my bicep. I turned, anticipating one of my mates. Instead, I found myself face to face with Lexi. Surprised, I sighed in disappointment. She looked furious, but amidst her anger, I glimpsed a fleeting flash of hurt cross her features. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by resolve. What the hell are you doing, Jamie? You blow off my suggestion of dinner and clubbing to celebrate your last exam so you can be here flirting with... Lexi hesitated, casting a disdainful glance at Stella. With what's-her-face? Yes, seems like a better option, I replied coolly. How can you be so cruel? If you hadn't broken it off, we'd be getting married in a week. Instead of trying to work things out, you're chatting up other girls? At least I'm single now, unlike someone else in this conversation. Stella and her friends had fallen silent, uncomfortable witnesses to our tense exchange. Go home, Lexi, I continued, my voice firm. I don't want to celebrate today with you. I want to celebrate it with my friends, people who are upfront and honest with me, not looking to stab me in the back. As I watched the red flush creep up from Lexi's chest to her face, it spread surprisingly fast, like witnessing a flash flood rush down a dry riverbed. How could I... Her words faltered, and with a final gasp, she spun around and practically sprinted through the crowd, pushing people aside in her haste to reach the exit. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to Stella and her friends. Sorry about that, ladies. If I thought an apology would suffice, I was mistaken. Within 10 minutes, they had pieced together the entire story. Sympathy flowed freely, accompanied by more than a few beers being pressed into my hand. By the end of the night, Stella gently guided me into a taxi, not before slipping her phone number into my shirt pocket. With Lexi's betrayal derailing all my plans, I found myself somewhat adrift in the lead up to Christmas. What should have been a busy time filled with wedding preparations and a honeymoon was now spent behind the wheel, driving for Uber. I couldn't fathom the number of people I chauffeured around Sydney who had come solely for Christmas shopping. Were they crazy? In this day and age, why endure traffic and crowds when online shopping was an option? Christmas came and went, leaving behind a bittersweet trail of coffee dates with Lexi and obligatory exchanges like the Christmas card I bought her. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree as she unwrapped it, but inside I felt more like the Grinch than Santa Claus. When she presented me with a beautifully wrapped box containing a sophisticated watch, I thanked her sincerely, but couldn't bring myself to wear it. The disappointment in her eyes was evident when I gently closed the lid and politely declined her offer to spend New Year's Eve together. Despite my mother's wise words about forgiveness, I struggled with the idea of letting go of the anger and hurt that had festered inside me since Lexi's betrayal. Each coffee date felt like a test of my patience and resolve. I could sense Lexi's relentless efforts to win me back, and while I entertained the thought of forgiveness, I wasn't ready to vocalize it to her. For now, it remained a private struggle, a battle between my lingering resentment and the possibility of moving forward. As the days passed and the new year unfolded, I found myself caught between nostalgia for what could have been and a steely determination to protect myself from further heartache. Lexi's gestures of affection, like the watch, were reminders of a past I wasn't ready to reconcile with. Despite her hopeful advances, my heart remained guarded, knowing that forgiveness was a journey I needed to undertake on my own terms, in my own time. In January, with engineering firms mostly closed until mid-month, I focused on driving to keep my bank account healthy while waiting to hear back from job applications. Lexi's persistent calls continued throughout February and March, showcasing her unwavering determination, a trait that undoubtedly contributed to her success as a top salesperson. Despite my intermittent low moods, I occasionally accepted her invitations, though always opting for low-key outings like coffee dates or the occasional movie. On the other hand, Stella's calls were a different story altogether. They brought joy and laughter into my days. Our most recent escapade on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, was a perfect example. As the Irish festivities swept through Sydney, complete with green-clad revelers, shamrocks, and pubs serving green beer, and even green mashed potatoes with meat pies, Stella had a unique idea for my attire. Dress up as Where's Wally? Yes, in the midst of a sea of green, I found myself darting around, dressed like the iconic character from children's books. Blue jeans, a red and white striped jumper, matching beanie, oversized glasses, and even a walking stick. It seemed like Stella had arranged for every pub on our lively pub crawl to take notice of my conspicuous costume. "Lexi, I need to speak with you. It's really important." "Sweetie, you know I'm always here for you," she replied, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I've heard some things, Lexi, about what you've been saying." Her tone shifted slightly, a hint of unease creeping in. "What do you mean?" "You've been telling people I'm leading you on, cheating on you to make you jealous. That's not cool, Lexi. Not cool at all." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "Jamie, I didn't mean... No, Lexi, save it. I've been patient, I've been civil, but this crosses a line. You know it's not true, and spreading lies like that is just vindictive." "I was hurt, Jamie. I didn't know what else to do." "Well, it ends now. No more games, no more lies. We're done, Lexi, for good." Her voice cracked slightly, a mix of frustration and resignation. "Jamie, please." "I'm done, Lexi. Goodbye." With that, I hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was time to move on from Lexi once and for all. I cringed inwardly at the endearment and the false enthusiasm, knowing all too well the lies she was spreading about me, but I pushed through. How about tomorrow? Sunday? The 1st? Maybe around 11? I asked. That sounds wonderful. I can't wait. I'll have a coffee ready for you along with your favorite muffins, Lexi replied eagerly. Great. See you then, I said, ending the call. Parked in front of Lexi's apartment block, I took a moment to compose myself. One last deep breath, and I headed across the street with renewed determination. Life felt promising. Lexi swung the door open after my first knock. I moved quickly to avoid my hand hitting her face with the second knock. Come in. It's so good to see you, she greeted me warmly. The inviting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and what seemed to be apple and cinnamon muffins greeted me as I entered. Life was undeniably looking up. We settled at her dining table, each of us with our coffees and muffins in hand. You won't believe it, Lexi. When everything happened, you were the first person I thought of, I began. Oh my God, what? Ages ago, I gave this guy a lift. Stephen Cummings was his name. He was really bummed because his firm had just lost out on a big contract, and I sort of gave him a bit of a pep talk and some advice, I began, watching Lexi closely to gauge her interest. Well, it turns out he took my advice and his company won back the big contract, I continued. That's wonderful, Jamie, she replied, sounding mildly intrigued, perhaps unsure why I was emphasizing this. It gets even better. The company he works for has offices in Sydney, Melbourne, and get this, New York and London, I said with a grin. Have they offered you a job? She asked, catching on to the significance. You bet they have, I said proudly. Here in Sydney, she guessed. Nope, I teased. Where then? Melbourne? She tried again. Wrong again. Try London, I exclaimed. Oh my God, wow, Lexi exclaimed, genuine surprise and excitement in her voice. Wow. All right. It turns out Stephen's the head engineer, and he wants me to be his right hand for this bridge they're building just outside of London. The project is going to take a year. They pay for my flights and accommodation over there. They're even paying for Stephen's family to join him. Oh my God, Lexi exclaimed again, clearly taken aback by the exciting prospect. It's just like we dreamed. Living and working in England. Europe on our doorstep. Just think. The Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, Amsterdam, Venice, Florence, and Madrid. Just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Oh, and Paris. The Champs-Élysées. Lexi sighed dreamily, her eyes lighting up with anticipation. And then there's the Hofbrauhaus in Munich, and the Parthenon in Rome, I added, feeding off her enthusiasm. And all the famous castles and churches, she chimed in, catching on to the excitement. I smiled, feeling a sense of nostalgia and shared dreams between us. How many conversations had we had over the years about these very places? Too many to count. And don't forget the food, I chuckled. I think I can already taste a buttery croissant, or maybe one of those fruit flan thingies. Oh God, yes, pâté foie gras. Lexi practically salivated at the thought. And they have all those fancy cooking schools? I couldn't help but stifle a laugh. Lexi wasn't exactly known for her culinary prowess, though she did enjoy watching cooking shows. And just imagine, a real bullfight. Oh no, that's barbaric, Lexi recoiled, her expression one of disapproval. I struggled to suppress another chuckle. I shrugged, trying to steer the conversation to more appealing topics. How about some of the festivals? There's that one in Spain where the whole town gets covered in tomatoes, or Oktoberfest in Germany. Oh my God, yes, Lexi brightened up at the idea. I have to say, there's a whole heap of British things I'm itching to try too, like their pub food, you know, bangers and mash, or a beef and Guinness pie, and I gotta say, I want to visit the Tower of London. Oh, yes, and the Portobello Road Market, and the one at Camden. London is supposed to be so fantastic for shopping, Lexi added enthusiastically. I smiled, feeling her excitement rubbing off on me. When do we leave? How soon do I need to hand in my notice at work? Lexi suddenly asked, her eagerness palpable. Excuse me? When do we leave? Lexi asked again, her excitement bubbling over. Oh, there's no we, Lexi, just me. I'm the one who gets to live the dream, I replied, unable to contain my grin. But I thought... You were so eager to tell me. The smile that Lexi supposedly loved spread across my face, so wide and bright it could have lit up the island of Manhattan. April Fools, Lexi! Asterisk, asterisk, epilogue. Asterisk, asterisk. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you viewed it, my pained wishes for Lexi came true. She did walk in on husbands 1 and 2, spending interesting time in bed with other women. One she had considered a friend, the other a colleague of the hubby's. Fortunately, in neither case were there children involved, so no broken families. She was now on to husband #3. And me? Yes, I did live and work in Europe for a few years. No, I didn't fall in love and marry Stella, though we remain great friends to this very day. Instead, I met and married an English Rose. Well, she'd kill me for calling her that because she's actually Scottish. Guess what our wedding date was? You guessed it, April Fool's Day.